All right, so good evening. Hope everyone is doing well tonight and looking forward to another Bible study with you. We're back in the Old Testament on these head scratcher verses. We're bouncing back and forth between New Testament and Old Testament. A couple of things. I had to do some things on the computer, get some things set up. So if things aren't exactly right, please send me an email, a text, put something in the Facebook chat. Let me know what is going on with that. I think maybe the audio video is off, maybe just a little. I really can't tell with what I'm looking at to monitor this, so you'll have to let me know that. I'll go back and look at the replay and see if it looks right. But thanks for being here. So tonight we are going to be looking in the Old Testament. We're going to be in the book of 2 Kings. So if you have a Bible, hang on just a second. Let me get something figured out. So sorry about that. If you have a Bible, turn to 2 Kings chapter 5. Kind of a new setup, got some things going on. Some buttons don't do exactly what they did last week, so I'll work through that. We'll get it all figured out. So 2 Kings chapter 5, we are going to be looking at a story about Naaman. You're probably familiar with this story. I don't know that this story is a head scratcher as much. It's somewhat humorous. I'm not sure it really fits that category either, and it's really not too difficult. There's just some really good lessons in it. So I don't really know why I put this in a head scratcher lesson, because it's not really a head scratcher, but I wanted to talk about it, and maybe that's all I need is just to know I want to talk about it. But Naaman it says that he is the commander of the army of the king of Aram, and he was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given great victory to Aram, and he was a valiant soldier. And then there's just this little follow-up phrase, but he had leprosy. So the story starts out really with like a resume. I mean, this is a pretty impressive man. He's commander of the army. He's definitely respected by the king. He's famous for his victories. He's a man of valor. He's a man of honor. He probably stood tall among those men who were under his control. He's got the medals. He's got the titles. Sounds like he has the applause. But then there's that one line that kind of changes everything. It just simply says, but he was a leper. Now, that's an interesting Hebrew word, and we're not going to go into that tonight. It can mean a variety of skin diseases, so it might not be exactly leprosy the way that we think of leprosy, but he had some type of skin infection, some type of skin disease, and leprosy is probably a really good translation for that. So beneath this polished armor that Naaman has, he's, this celebration of military conquest and the honor he would carry into a room when he walked in. There is this slow, silent disease that's taking over his body. And like a sword can't defeat it. There's not a strategy he can really use to overcome it. There's not like political favor could erase it. And I think that's interesting, because many times that's how Scripture really speaks. It introduces a strength, and then it announces a fracture. It gives kind of the greatness of something, and then it kind of gently uncovers the wound. And it should cause us to really ask kind of a deeper question, and that is, what's beneath our armor? Nathan's leprosy here is more than just like a skin disease. In this story, it becomes a symbol, I think, of a deeper uncleanness. And I think it's probably for us in this story a symbol of a deeper uncleanness. He has power, but he can't heal himself. He has honor, but he can't command holiness. He has access to kings, but he really can't draw near to God, it doesn't seem. So it's almost like this really slow unraveling of his life. And it should ask us the question, what do we have beneath our armor? I mean, beneath the exterior, but behind what everybody else can see. I mean, you can just imagine I mean, I can, and this is just imagination, but Naaman is getting ready to go out in battle. And I mean, he would have all of his battle armor on and all of his, all of his shields and his sword. And he'd probably be gleaming with a type of armor that he would have going into battle. But beneath that armor, there's something that is just not healthy. And I think we should ask the question, what is it that's beneath our armor? And sometimes it's not something that anybody else can see. Sometimes it's only the thing that we can see, and nobody else might even know that it's there. And so now he's carrying this hidden burden, this hidden problem, and maybe we're carrying one. Maybe it's, somebody might call it guilt or shame. Maybe we try to numb it with distraction and things that are going on. Maybe we hide behind performance. But what is it that their soul is having difficulty carrying, and that thing that you can't escape? And Naaman, as powerful as he is, he cannot escape this disease. There's not anything he can do about it to make it go away, because that simple little phrase, but he was a leper. The other just kind of side note about this, until you can see the truth behind the armor, you really can't see or seek the cleansing that only God can give. And so success in this case doesn't shield Naaman from the struggles of life. The physical sickness, I think, represents even a spiritual sickness for all of us. So he's this valiant warrior. He's this incredible guy, but he's a leper. Now, I wanted to take just a second and talk about Naaman's world. Now, Naaman is in this world where you have, this is a map of most of the miracles, the things of, didn't mean to do that. Sorry. I don't know why my computer program keeps doing that when I'm trying to show you a map. Let's see if I can make this bigger. Here on this map, it says Naaman is healed of leprosy. And that would be, I think I can draw on this now. So that would be this area right here, that Naaman is healed of leprosy. Aram is here, and we would call that maybe modern day Syria. Some translations use Syria. Israel is further down south, but this is a time of the divided kingdom. So Israel is further down south. It's down here. In this area, which is called Samaria. Then further south from that, you have, I don't know why I can't make that work, but further down south from that, you have an area that is the southern kingdom, which is Judah. And so you have all of those things going on. So here we go. We got down here in this area, we have Judah. Up here, we have Israel. It's also being called Samaria. And so Aram, which is up here, they have raiding parties that will come down into Samaria, and they will attack these villages. So when it's talking about Naaman and his army and the army of the Syrians and the king of Aram, they're actually an enemy of Israel at that moment. And Israel is also called Samaria, and that's going to be important in this next verse. Now, the bands of Aram, this is verse 2, the bands of Aram had gone out and taken captive a young girl from Israel. And she served Naaman's wife, and she said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Now, I don't want to read over that verse too quickly. I think there's just a couple of things in there that I would like to point out. It just says she's a young child, she's a captive, but think for a second about what that means. She's been torn from her home. Her life has been interrupted by this violence. Her childhood is being rewritten in a way by the war that is going on around her. And in all of that brokenness and in all of those shadows, she speaks out. It's just a simple, striking sentence. If my master would go see the prophet in Samaria, he would be healed. So this young girl has great faith in what Elisha can do, and it's not. And it's that she knew that that Elisha could heal Naaman, and it comes from this slave girl. One of the things I want to point out in this, so I'm not articulating this very well, is that slave girl is a really unlikely doorway that Naaman is going to go through to encounter God. You know, her words don't carry a lot of force. They carry a lot of weight. She's not important. She's not even named. A name for the young girl is never given. It doesn't say anything about her coming from an important family. She's just a captive girl. And you don't have to be somebody important or somebody known to make God known to someone else. And you don't even have to be free to speak about freedom, and you don't have to be strong to talk about healing. And I love this part of the young girl in the story because so many times God moves through what we might call unnoticed people. He moves through people that the world seems to forget. And here you have this young girl, and probably in the life of Naaman, even though she is the servant of his wife, she's probably not anybody that's very important. She is just a slave girl. But here she is with this small, I just think, excuse me, this smallest voice, and she is introducing into Naaman's life an opportunity for him to be healed and to come into contact with Elisha, and through Elisha to come into contact with God. But it looks very simple and very normal. And I think maybe a lesson from that is if we're too busy chasing the things that look dramatic, we might miss the thing that is divine, because there doesn't seem to be anything dramatic about it. It's just a girl saying he needs to see the prophet who's in Samaria. So Naaman finds out about that, and he goes to his master, probably the king, tells him what the girl from Israel says, and he says, well, go see the prophet. I'll send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left. He takes with him 10 talents of silver, which is quite a bit of silver, by the way. It's about 750 pounds for us. So that's a lot. I didn't convert that into dollars for today. It doesn't matter. 6,000 shekels of gold and 10 sets of clothing. I mean, he has a lot of stuff that he's taking with him as he goes out to see this prophet in Samaria. So he takes the letter, he takes his stuff, and the king, that goes to the king of Israel says, with this letter I am sending you my servant Naaman, so that you may cure him of his leprosy. And I mean, you can just imagine. So the king of Israel gets that letter, and I mean, one of the things that you do in the Old Testament to show sorrow or show outrage or that you just don't know what to do is you tear your clothes. It says you rend your clothes. So he tears his robes, and he says, am I God? I mean, can I kill? Can I bring back to life? So this fellow sends someone to me to be cured of his leprosy. He's just trying to pick a fight with me. He is just trying to start a war. So Elisha hears about it, and Elisha goes, and he goes to the king of Israel. He sends a message, and he says, look, why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and I will show you that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and his chariots, and he stopped at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. All right, so hang on right there for a second. Let's grab a couple of lessons, just a couple of observations about the text, and then let's come back. You know, there's a couple of other things when you start looking at that story, especially when you start looking at it through the eyes of the slave girl and the eyes of Naaman. You know, the first one of those is just kind of a simple little lesson, and that's faith can survive even when life falls apart. I mean, that young slave girl, her home is destroyed, her freedom is stolen, her childhood is in shambles, and her belief in God remains intact. Her belief in God through the prophet Elisha. And she had every reason to abandon her faith, but she didn't. She still believed in God and his goodness and God's prophets. And the second one we touched on just briefly, you don't need a platform to be a messenger. You don't, in our world, we think about platforms. There's Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and social media influencers, or maybe you're in a place that you're seen important, or you have a voice. Maybe the media listens to you. This young girl is a slave in a foreign household with no title, no voice, and no right even really to speak, but she speaks anyway. She doesn't preach a sermon. She doesn't confront anybody. It almost sounds like she just whispers one simple sentence to Naaman's wife. If he would just see the prophet who's in Samaria, he'd be cured of his leprosy. And that whisper, it moved kingdoms and what happened between kingdoms. She's not a prophet, but she points to a prophet. And she doesn't perform the healing, but she opens the door to the healing. And again, God delights in what the world dismisses. You don't need to be you don't need a platform to proclaim that truth. The other thing about the young girl, as I was thinking through this and just trying to put myself in her shoes for a moment, compassion has to rise above resentment. This is she's a servant in Naaman's household. Naaman, we read earlier, he is a commander of the armies. He's the commander of the army that probably led the raid that destroyed her people. I mean, she's in his household. But even in his household, even though he's commander of the army, when she sees his affliction, she evidently longs for him to be healed. She's not looking for his downfall. She's not trying to punish him. She doesn't say, well, I'm glad he's got leprosy. I hope he keeps it. She's not looking for anything. Before there's any transformation in Naaman, there is this young girl who has compassion when many people might have had resentment. I mean, it's the young girl is like the mercy of God on display. It's just that the mercy that goes to people who doesn't deserve it. And so I think from that, sometimes we have to ask if we allow pain to harden our hearts towards somebody who God still is trying to heal, and he's trying to use us to do it, but we have to look past resentment and maintain our compassion to do that. And again, back to this young girl, she's in a painful part of her life, I would think, but even in the painful places, God brings and God uses those for redemption. Her pain could have silenced her, but it didn't. Sometimes God works through that deliverance through people who are first made to walk through suffering. Sometimes God's mercy is spoken through people who have been broken. So what if, like, the current struggle that you're having, what if that's not the end of the story? What if your painful suffering is the beginning of someone else's redemption? What if God is going to use you in that suffering to reach out to someone else who's suffering? It's just something we probably need to think about sometimes. And truth spoken in love can change eternities. I mean, something really happens with Naaman. Later in the story, he's going to say, hey, this is the only God I'm going to worship from now on. And he's going to take dirt back with him because it'll represent at least the presence of the God at the place that he was at. So Naaman, remember, he loads up all of his stuff, and he has this thought of what's going to happen. In his mind, this healing it should feel like honor. I mean, he brings a letter, he brings silver, he brings gold, he's got chariots and a military escort. He's not showing up at Elisha's house as a beggar. He is showing up as like a decorated general, somebody who's really, really important. I wonder, like, on the journey, if Naaman, because I would have done this, and I just wonder if Naaman would have done it. I probably would have rehearsed my speech. Like, I would have probably rehearsed the moment I was going to meet the prophet. I'd imagine the prophet coming out with reverence and maybe waving his hand over my wound, or touching my arm, or touching my skin disease, my leprosy, maybe calling on the name of the Lord, maybe pronouncing some great word of power, maybe coming from Naaman's world. I would have thought there would be some kind of incantation, some kind of speech, some kind of something that pronounces the power of God and the power of the prophet. So there's going to be this dramatic encounter to heal this incredible disease. In my mind, that's what I would have expected. And I think maybe in Elisha's mind, in Naaman's mind, he might have expected the same thing. But if you go back to the text, did you see that really clear? He stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha, this is verse 10. I think this was really cool. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan and your flesh will be restored and you will be cleansed. Did you catch that? He sent a messenger. It does not seem like Elisha even came to the door of the house. It's like he sent somebody else out with the message, and even the message to Naaman seems absurd. Go wash in the Jordan 7 times. And I think when it says that Naaman went away angry, and he said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than any of the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned around and went off in a rage. I'm not sure that I would not have had the same reaction that Naaman had. He was expecting something incredible, right? But he doesn't get something incredible. He gets something that looks really simple. What Elisha did not meet his expectation. And sometimes I think that's what we want. We want the power of God, but we want it to come in some kind of human packaging, right? We want to be able to see it in a way that it looks like God is doing things exactly the way that we think God ought to do things. We want to be restored sometimes, but we really don't want to be inconvenienced. And so God's moment didn't match Naaman's imagination and his expectation. And I'll pause there and say that because I think that's pretty true of us sometimes. I think that's the moment that many people walk away. They walk away because what God is doing, even though it's God doing it, it doesn't seem like it's the way that they want God to do it. They're like Naaman. They're expecting somebody to come out and wave their hands and pronounce something and say something incredible so that God will do whatever it is that we ask God to do. But what God is looking for here is not somebody that's going to speak a lot of messages. What he's looking for in Naaman is somebody who will just surrender. Grace usually comes wrapped in simplicity. I think that's a good way to say it. He just said, hey, go dip yourself 7 times, wash and be clean. So God's not interested in impressing Naaman. And I think that's really interesting. He's not interested in Naaman getting this great impression of what's going to happen. It's about exposing Naaman's pride. He is expecting this incredible healing moment, and he's given these really, really simple instructions. And, spiritual pride, sometimes it kind of disguises itself as reverence. Naaman here is not really opposing God. He just came expecting something different than the way God was going to act. And so there's kind of an unspoken demand there, which is God should move in a way that honors me. That's what I see when I hear Naaman. I thought that this was going to happen, but his expectation was really kind of a form of entitlement. He wanted healing, but he wanted to be healed with this type of dignity. He kind of thought, well, if I show up with power and money and stuff, then God will show up in power. But God's not impressed with his medals or his money or the things that he brought or his gold or his silver, or his clothes. It's just a simple truth. Pride doesn't always appear arrogant. Sometimes it looks like religion and honoring people, but sometimes it's not. So when we start imagining God's help, sometimes we imagine God's help, but we often picture ourselves still in control. I don't think Naaman's frustration is really about the Jordan River. I think it's about control. I think he's got this script that he has in his head, and Elisha just doesn't follow the script. And so it exposes that tendency of the heart. And oftentimes when we go to God and we ask God for help, we do want God to help, but we want him to help in the way that we think he ought to help. You know, we still want to be in control. We just want God to do the thing that we want him to do so that we know that we're still in control. We try to, you know, to work around our pride and have God come in and try to help us with that. So I think a lesson from Naaman is you have to learn to let go of the outcome. Like you can't let disappointment with God's methods become a barrier for you. You know, the healing is there if Naaman will just go do what God told him to do. And sometimes in our world, we try to figure out or rationalize and say, well, God really didn't mean this, or he didn't mean that, or it doesn't mean this because we could go do this. And that's a really, really dangerous insight. I mean, do you cling to how you think things ought to happen, or to your own intellect, or you listen and trust the prophet? Do you stop and listen and trust God? And so all of that is going on in the story. Now, luckily, Naaman has a really good servant, a group of servants, right? So Naaman is furious because Elisha doesn't even come out of the house. He sends a servant. He doesn't wave his hands. He doesn't stand and call on God's name. He just said, just go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and you'll be restored and you'll be cleansed. So his servants come to him, and this is really, really great advice. His servants come to him and said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you have done it? So how much more then when he tells you wash and be cleansed? So they said, look, if God told you to do something really incredible, you would have done that because you think it's really incredible. And I see us in the story of Naaman all of the time. You know, all of the time. And again, just listen to where the advice is coming from. A servant girl said, you need to go see the prophet. He goes to see the prophet, but he doesn't want to do what the prophet told him to do. So then again, the servants come, again, lower people on the totem pole and say, well, why don't you go ahead and do it? And maybe one of the greatest miracles in the story is that instead of being mad at the servants, Naaman listens to the servants. I mean, maybe that is one of the most interesting, underrated parts of the story, because it says that he listens. Now, I've never seen the Jordan River. I know some of you probably listening to this have. I remember Houston telling me about it when he went to Greece, and they went over to Israel. But from what I understand, it's not a really clean river. And maybe it's, get the impression here, at least compared to the Abana in the far rivers of Damascus, it is not very clean, because those rivers are supposed to be better than this river. And so he goes into maybe, I mean, I'm envisioning, this is just me envisioning, I don't know if this would really be true, but I'm envisioning him going down into muddy water. And, where I grew up in West Tennessee, we did not have rock-bottomed rivers. We have mud-bottomed rivers. So in West Tennessee, the rivers that I grew up around, most of those rivers were muddy. When I moved to Middle Tennessee, and there were more rock-bottom rivers and creeks, then those were pretty clean, and I wasn't used to seeing those. So I'm thinking kind of a river like the Obion River. I mean, one that's just kind of muddy all of the time. So he goes in there and he dips 7 times, it's just like Elisha told him to. And as he does that and he dips himself 7 times, it says his flesh is restored, and it comes like that of a young boy. So Naaman and all of the attendants go back to God. Now, I think there's a really important lesson there. And that is, God may ask something simple, but obedience is never shallow. I mean, he didn't ask Naaman to do anything that's particularly hard. It wasn't hard physically for him to do that. It wasn't hard for him to find the Jordan. Probably wasn't hard for him to get into the Jordan. The thing that God asked Naaman to do looks like, and I think it was pretty simple. Just because God asked you to do something simple doesn't mean that the result of what God does because of your obedience is going to be simple. I mean, just look at this story, right? Naaman does a very simple thing, dipping himself in the Jordan 7 times. God does a really complicated thing because he took away the leprosy. And he's not... It's not a comparison of the water of Jordan and the river and the water of the rivers of Damascus. The power is not in the water. It wasn't the Jordan that had the healing capability. It was God who had that healing capability. The healing came from the fact that Naaman was obedient and did the thing that God told him to do. And if you're going to try to sit down and rationalize that and make perfect sense out of it and know, this is why it happened from a physical or a scientific standpoint, you're not ever going to figure that out because it's not there. It is just because he was obedient to God. So even though God asks something simple, what God does with that is incredible. So he goes back, and you go back in the text in 2 Kings chapter 5, he goes back, he says, look, I know there's no God in all of the world except the one in Israel, so accept a gift from your servant. And Elisha, I'm amazed at Old Testament prophets, because Elisha just said, I'm not going to take anything from you. I mean, just knowing that God was going to take care of him. And he said, well, if you're not going to take anything, let me get as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings or sacrifices to any other God but the Lord. And may the Lord your God forgive your servant for this one thing, when my master returns to the temple of Rimmon, which is a Syrian god, a god of Aram, to bow down, and he's leaning on my arm, and I bow there also. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. So Naaman has so much faith in God. He's already looking at a situation saying, I don't really want to do this, but because my master is going to do this, and I'll have to do this because I'm taking care of my master, just let God forgive me for that. And Elisha, in all of his greatness, as the voice of God, says, go in peace. So Naaman leaves, and Elisha doesn't take anything from him. And you know the rest of the story, right? Gehazi says, and he is the servant of Elisha. He says, Elisha was too easy on him. I'm going to go after him, and I'm going to get something. So he runs after Naaman. Naaman sees him coming. He stops the chariot, gets down from the chariot, says, hey, is everything all right? Gehazi says, yeah, everything's fine. My master sent me to say that 2 young men from the company of prophets have come from the hill country of Ephraim. So please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing. So Naaman says, hey, he had all of those talents, right? And he said, take 2 talents of silver. And he ties them up. He gets them in 2 bags, 2 sets of clothing, 2 of his servants, and they carry them ahead of Gehazi. And when he comes to the hill, he takes the things away from the servants of Naaman because he doesn't want Elisha to know where he's gone. And Elisha, he gets back, and Elisha says, well, where have you been? And Gehazi says, well, I haven't been anywhere. And I love this statement from Elisha. He says, was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes, olive groves, vineyards, flocks, herds, and men servants or maid servants? So Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever. And then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and he was leprous as white as snow. And that is just how greed can sometimes get the best of us. Sometimes, and I think there's a really interesting lesson in there. I don't know that I've ever brought it out as much maybe as I should, but you can't buy grace. Healing is not a transaction. Healing flows from the mercy of God, and you can't, and I think maybe this is the lesson here, you can't pay for what only God can give. Now Gehazi didn't agree with that. He's got to get the money. He's got to say, hey, you were just too easy on him. And that's kind of the tragedy of Gehazi. He has spent years, I think, in the presence of Elisha. He's witnessed miracles. He's heard truth. He's seen God move through his mercy again and again. He's seen God take care of Elisha. He's seen God take care of his needs. But something something in Gehazi seems to be unchanged. And there's also this comparison. You have Naaman, who comes as a mighty warrior, and he's healed by surrender. You have Gehazi, who should be healed by surrender because he's seen all the things that God has done, and his heart is just made hard by the proximity of wealth. So it's not just a story about greed or dishonesty. It's a warning, I think, about using the gifts of God for personal gain. You know, it's, in the New Testament, it talks about those who preach the word for the love of money, or they see the message as a means to financial gain. Now, by that, I don't mean that people don't receive some financial gain. I mean, even in the Old Testament, those who served in the temple, the priests, were taken care of by the contribution of the people. New Testament, you don't, muzzle the ox while he's treading the grain, all of that kind of stuff, right? I get a check from Clarksville Highway every week. I don't think that's wrong, but you do have to be very careful not to tarnish the message of grace and not to corrupt the posture of your heart, and to understand the blessings of God and how they should be used. So, I think there's a really great lesson in that. There's a couple of other lessons I threw down. I took them off the screen there. It's just more lessons on the slide. Ministry shouldn't be really monetized, that we treat what's sacred kind of like a product. We have to maintain our integrity in that. And that doesn't mean, again, you know what I was saying about, you can still, sometimes you receive money from doing the work of evangelist. New Testament, the elder who does teaching and preaching is worthy of double honor. So there are messages there, but I think there's just some really good messages here from this story of Naaman, somebody who, in the eyes of the world, is pretty successful. A servant girl who he probably thought very little about is the one who introduced him to the concept that he could find healing through the prophet who is in Samaria, who is a prophet of God. He goes there, God doesn't act exactly the way that Naaman thinks he should act, or Elisha doesn't act exactly the way that Naaman thinks that Elisha should act. So he gets angry because he's asked to do something simple instead of something difficult. You got some good servants who says, hey, you need to follow the simple instructions, because if he'd have given you something difficult, you would have done that. And so then Naaman receives his healing. He becomes a worshiper of God. Gehazi, who has been following Elisha and watching the works of God for years, becomes hardened in his heart, and he chases after money. Just a lot of good stories. Again, I don't know that one really fit in the whole hard to understand or even humorous, but I think it's really good. So Sunday morning, for class, we are in Fueled by Fire. Still doing a book on the Holy Spirit. I have a handout for you. I hope I have to finish writing the chapter I'm trying to hand out Sunday, so hopefully I'll get that done. We'll get that done, hopefully, and give it to you on Sunday. Sunday morning, we are having a back-to-school bash. So that's going to be from 12 to 2 after worship. We're going to have hot dogs, hot dogs and chips to eat. If you're in our neighborhood, you need school supplies, need a haircut, a lot of things going on with that. So please come by for that. And Jeff will be speaking. We have a service that is designed just to honor and pray over the kids who are going back to school. So we'll be praying Sunday morning over our school children, be praying over our teachers, be praying over the parents, and just looking forward to that. So hope you've enjoyed the live stream tonight. Hope it has you've learned something from it and it has been profitable. I don't really see any questions anywhere. So either I explained it really well or you don't have any questions. So I hope you have a great evening, and I will talk to you soon.